Bryan Johnson is an American businessman who made something on the order of $400 million when the company he founded, Braintree Venmo, was sold to PayPal in 2013. Notice I worded that pretty carefully. Despite what Bryan will tell you, he was not the one who made that sale happen, and he really shouldn't get credit for it. By the time the deal was finalized, Bryan hadn't held a position at the company in over 2 years and was, in fact, banned from entering their headquarters. If you look deeper into Bryan's life and work, you notice the story he tells about himself is marked with a lot of these half-truths. Claims that aren't false exactly, but are framed in a way to give him more credit than he really deserves. Or claims that are outrageously false, but that he can plausibly say were just jokes or thought experiments. That original half-truth that he set up a deal worth $800 million basically launched his career, earning him keynote speeches and puff pieces in every business outlet under the sun. That and all the money, which he's been investing mostly in the field of biotechnology. First, he started the OS Fund, a venture capital project that invested in companies promising things like DNA data storage, AI drug discovery, and the weirdly hard to pronounce yeast-based manufacturing.
I'll be in Beijing, opening up new pork markets.
Then he put down $100 million to start Kernel, a company which originally wanted to put chips in people's brains and which has since given up. In the last 2 years, Bryan has gotten pretty famous for his increasingly far-fetched ambitions to extend the human lifespan, past the current record of 122, past 200, and toward infinity. His latest project, Blueprint, has allegedly restructured his life around this goal with a personal wellness routine so rigorous it's honestly inhumane. Basically no agency, basically no sunlight, as many as 60 supplements a day, and 17-hour fasting periods broken up only by identical meals of vegetable and nut slurry. Going off what Bryan says, his goal is to be a human lab rat for the life extension business by subjecting himself to all these experimental anti-aging therapies and tracking how well they work. Most famously, the Blood Boy incident had his teenage son draw about a fifth of his total blood volume and donate the plasma to his dad.
Thanks for the plasma.
No worries.
And people make a big deal of this, but in their defense, it only happened once. Because it didn't do anything. All this has created a genuine feeding frenzy for journalists, content creators, and critics in the biotechnology space. It's easy to gawk at Bryan, especially when he's doing photo shoots like these. But on some level, it's kind of all a misdirect. Bryan says he's part of the efforts to eliminate death, but the actual problem that Blueprint exists to solve is much more mundane. Allow me to illustrate. For an industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars, tech is wrong a lot. Over the last 15 years, we've seen them take these increasingly ludicrous big swings that so rarely turn out to be anything positive. The best example is probably like cryptocurrency. Well, countless companies were scrambling to integrate the blockchain into their operations. Any asshole who spent half an hour on Google could tell the technology was like basically useless and also kind of evil. The tech industry has gained their reputation as the architects of the future, with all the investment that implies, with their constant scramble to find the next big thing, the next internet, the next music streaming, the next iPhone, products that'll tear clean through the old ways of doing things and create whole new markets in the process. Of course, like properly revolutionary technology takes a lot of money to build. So the trick is to sell the innovation before you actually have the innovation in hand. These hype cycles exist to get investors on board before profit, demand, or even a viable product have materialized at the very beginning of what's promised to be a long and profitable journey.
In order to compete, we innovate.
In order to innovate, we redefine.
And how do we redefine? With a new initiative.
This is going great.
Think how great it would be if we come up with a product.
Products are for people who don't have presentations.
The way this is supposed to work is that the company raises enough money to hire the people who will make the thing real. But most investors are not technology experts, and if you find yourself in the right place at the right time, you can raise billions of dollars on the promise of a world-shaking innovation that cannot exist. Something that is just not compatible with the rules of reality. Ever since Bryan came into a boatload of money with the Braintree acquisition, he's taken an interest in biotech with a special attention to the kind of things people call moonshots. Really ambitious ideas that would change the world if implemented, but may not actually be possible. Brain chips, immortality. Here he is shouting out a head transplant startup. Here he is proposing a, quote, Ozempic-like intervention without side effects for new ideas and openness of mind, end quote. To my knowledge, no one is actually working on that. He just likes saying shit. As we've seen with Blueprint, these kinds of ideas are very sexy and earn a lot of press coverage. But a serious downside is that they need a lot of funding sustained over decades in order to make good on their promises. That's if the thing they set out to do is even possible in the first place. As the CEO of Blueprint and an investor in dozens of biotech companies, Bryan's job is to convince everyone that biotech is the next big thing. That, yeah, all that weird stuff we don't have evidence for yet, it's just totally the future. It's the future. It's going to happen. It's real. He gives interviews where he says that investing in biotech now is like investing in Microsoft in the 70s, which is kind of interesting because it's exactly what everyone says when they're trying to get you to buy some dumb stock. Well, no, actually, they usually say Apple in the 80s, so points for creativity. The guy is a hype man for the concept of technology, and Blueprint is his way of riling up the crowd before the star has even entered the building. As is required of him, he believes that enough time, investment, and processing power can make quite literally anything possible. To bolster his claims, Bryan folds the promises of earlier hype cycles into this new one. In particular, two of the biggest letdowns of the last decade, artificial intelligence and what's called big data, neither of which have been the game changers they were predicted to be. The link to big data is pretty clear. Blueprint is undeniably data-driven. Bryan does constant blood work, sleep monitoring, aggressively tests the supposed age of his individual organs, and often brags of being the most measured human being in history. The connection to AI is more obscure, but also more important. You might not know this unless you follow Bryan closely, but the entire concept of Blueprint is predicated on his belief that super intelligent AI is right around the corner. What other people might call AGI or the singularity. Bryan thinks it's imminent, and it, not doctors or scientists, will be what finally makes immortality possible.
We're orders of magnitude more intelligent than insects, and we can do things that insects can't do. AI is going to be orders of magnitude more intelligent than we are. It will do things we can't do. And one of those things could be solving aging.
Also, like AI, Blueprint wants to gain a foothold by replacing everything human in the world with a privatized, high-tech, dog shit awful version of itself.
By the way, comedy needs a renaissance, like very badly. Like it's basically died, and so it could be the way the story gets told is like AI saves comedy.
I'm thinking about doing a bit about how being transgender is actually a mental illness, or how all liberals are secretly gay and want to impose their will on everyone, or something about how transgender people are ruining the fabric of society. But no one is laughing.
In 2011, the prominent venture capitalist Mark Anderson set the tone of the next decade with his article, Why Software is Eating the World. In it, he argued the tech industry had grown so quickly by attempting to turn every company into a tech company. He says FedEx, for example, is best thought of as a software network that happens to have trucks, planes, and distribution hubs attached. And then once they've done that, outcompeting and killing off any businesses that didn't keep up with the times. Amazon killed bookstores, Netflix killed Blockbuster, digital music killed physical music. Anderson welcomed this trend and expected it to continue, which, of course, it has. At its best, technology drives convenience and efficiency. Its benefits are really easy to track on a graph, especially when you compare it to something like humanities, which works in less tangible skills like communication and critical thinking. In the US, humanities departments are being defunded in favor of STEM ones, and here in Canada, Humanities programs have seen a drastic drop in new students ever since software started eating everything. All in all, since this article was published, right as Bryan was coming on the scene, a worrying disinterest in the human experience has taken root. As more and more staples of human culture get replaced with technology, never is it considered that bookstores are just nicer to shop at, or that a society with more history graduates might be healthier and more democratic. We live in a data-driven world now, and we have to go wherever it leads. With Blueprint, Bryan Johnson has taken this casual disinterest in humanity, dialed it up to an active contempt, and turned it on himself. The goal is essentially to run his body like a business, organizing his entire life around maximizing these health markers and purging any aspect of himself that distracts from this goal. The way he talks about these markers leads me to believe he doesn't think of them as wellness indicators. He thinks they are wellness. Like his health is stored in the numbers, and anything that doesn't improve them has to be avoided. Blueprint is about life extension, but more than that, it's envisioned as a replacement for life. A segment of the company's homepage reads, with absolutely no context, "You don't have to listen to podcasts, read books, or debate with your friends." Oh, thank God. I hate that stuff. I hate my friends. When Bryan talks about being a person, it's always on the wrong side of a comparison. Being a person is a bit like being technology, but worse because you have these pesky desires and impulses you waste time fighting. He believes any trait that sets humans apart from technology is a downside by default because it must draw us away from optimizing ourselves. In his book titled Zeroism, Bryan describes himself as being split into two halves. There's daytime Bryan, the hard worker who's open to being optimized, and evening Bryan, the part of him that feels stressed about his life and tries to relieve that stress by eating junk food, drinking alcohol, and making impulsive decisions. Evening Bryan clearly makes some bad choices, but only because it's the part of him that has to deal with all the difficult emotions. Bryan's solution has been to, as he puts it, fire evening Bryan, which is to say, move through his life as if he doesn't have emotions or desires, and only listen to the part of himself that gets work done. Whenever he talks about his life before firing evening Bryan and starting Blueprint, there's a palpable feeling of shame. A recent video where he tells his life story while looking through old pictures is honestly a hard watch. So much of his commentary is about different ways he's felt bad about himself. Guilt for taking his kids to McDonald's, regret over spending so much time in the sun. There's clearly a lot of pain there.
This was a candid shot, and I think it does capture my essence of like, I feel really heavy with existence. I'm trying to stay upright, but I don't know where to go and how to. I think for me, the thing this image does more than anything is I'm in so much pain. Working very hard as an entrepreneur, I just kind of cracked, and depression was upon me. And so when I look at this, I can see Bryan's eyes and I can see how much pain he's in. Like, it's really hard to be him at this moment, and he just wants to die. And you can see here, I'm dead.
He credits Blueprint, with its absolutely unforgiving wellness regimen, for getting him out of this hole. In a video from late 2021, Bryan walks the viewer through the first half of his daily routine. Upon waking up at 5:30 in the morning, the first thing he does is weigh himself.
163.9, down 0.7 pounds, 147 of muscle, 7 pounds of bone, 22.2 BMI, 6% body fat, 60.7 water weight.
Then he walks to the counter to take his vitamin C and iron supplements, charges his smartwatch, and gets back in bed to meditate with his head inside a panel of LEDs which is advertised to reduce wrinkles. When he's done, he checks his phone to tell us his heart rate variability score is perfect today, then heads to the kitchen to make himself a concoction.
Make a little concoction.
Comprising precisely measured portions of water, cocoa, cinnamon, creatine powder, manganese, iodine, collagen peptides, and spermidine, which is called that for the reason you think. He uses this concoction to wash down his next 25 pills, chews 3 pieces of gum for 1 minute, then heads to his home gym to do... I'll just let him list it out.
Tip bar, calf raises, Ankle rotation, straight calf leg raises, standing leg lifts, butterflies, and QL. All right.
In the thick of his workout, Bryan explains the trick that makes the blueprint protocol possible.
The key to blueprint really is to try to eliminate my conscious mind from decision making. If I'm getting up in the morning, it's why I have my pills laid out, the charger's there, everything's in my bedstand. Once I wake up and open my eyes, it's just start the first movement, do the very first thing. And then all the way through 9:30 in the morning when my morning routine ends, it's all autopilot. I don't have to think about anything. It's never a question of should I work out, or do I feel well enough to work out, should I do this rep or not this rep. It's decided for me, it's done. And eliminating my choice has been the best thing, as my dad said, removing me from myself has been the best thing I've ever done.
Once his workout is done, it's time for skincare, which includes a gel that decreases skin autofluorescence. And then it's time for breakfast, which is this. What happens after this, he doesn't show, but it's not hard to imagine. In Zeroism, Bryan says he was unhappy partly because he was working really hard. But instead of working less hard, he's created a belief system where his happiness doesn't matter. You can argue that this is him doing what any number of humanities-starved computer scientists have done before him, translating a rich human experience into the language of data and code, and deciding anything lost in the process isn't worth keeping.
The most amazing discovery of our generation is that we can program anything. Code is the new language of creation. And this is happening right now in neuroscience, genomics, and synthetic biology. We are decoding the languages of biology into zeros and ones, and life itself is becoming programmable.
If we can quantify thoughts and emotions, conscious and subconscious, a new era of understanding, wellness, and human improvement will emerge.
The difference is that Bryan seems to view this as a purification process. By every indication, Bryan considers the intuitions, emotions, desires, philosophies, and social structures that define human existence to be irreparably corrupt institutions. He thinks that doing away with them isn't a side effect of technology, it's the point.
We are willing to courageously step into the future, and we're willing to divorce, or open to divorce from ourselves, all human norms, all human customs, all human thought, and we're willing to say we're wide open about everything. Absolute blank slate.
Data is objective. Data overwrites feeling and turns the mind vestigial. If you got a perfect sleep score but you're still groggy, no, you're wrong. If the clock says it's lunchtime but you're still full from breakfast, you have to eat. Overpowering your thoughts, desires, and bodily signals can bring you right to the edge of perfection. And failing to optimize your body isn't just irresponsible, it's immoral. A Time magazine profile from last year reads, Johnson thinks of any act that accelerates aging, like eating a cookie or getting less than 8 hours of sleep, as an act of violence. Before we get any further, I have some personal news. If you haven't already heard me gush about this all over the internet or noticed the ring on my finger, I'm going to switch it over. I got engaged. Pretty sweet. Yeah, getting hitched. The ring is kind of too big. We're getting it resized. The reason I bring this up now is because I find myself in the position of needing several $1,000s on short notice. So I'm doing a revamp of the old Patreon. I recently started posting vlogs where I talk about the things I've been like playing or listening to and give like a bit of a look behind the curtain at the production process. I'm also doing some giveaways for the higher tiers. So if you want an annotated copy of one of Bryan's books, you know what to do. But the big thing is that I've introduced a new highest tier where for a cool $200 a month, I will be your personal video essay consultant. I can give feedback on your scripts, help you develop ideas, thumbnails, work on like an audience growing strategy. I've been doing this kind of thing for friends for a while. So like anything I enjoy, it's time to monetize. If this sounds like your kind of thing, head over and check it out. I'm going to cap it at like 5 people a month, so I have time for everyone. Or check out the tiers that don't cost $200. That's cool too. Okay, enough of that. Back to the video. Over the last few months, I've told a lot of friends and family about the Blueprint Protocol and everything it demands. I've gotten some pretty visceral reactions out of people: horror, anger, sadness, just like bursting out laughing when they see the Blood Boy pictures. All fair, I think. But more than anything, people have responded by asking why you would even want to live forever if you have to spend every moment obsessing over your health. What's the point of all this? I've been asking myself this question too, and we'll get to my theory. But according to Bryan, the answer is simple: don't die. It's an undeniably catchy slogan, just begging to be put on a t-shirt, which they do. The Blueprint store sells official Don't Die merch. And you know what? As a gesture of good faith, I'm going to follow their lead here. I recently spent $16 on this here shirt and these press-on letters. I wasn't about to pay shipping. I'm just going to bootleg it. And while I do this, I want to mention that I did reach out to Bryan. I was hoping to get an interview because this is going to get kind of real, and I wanted to give the guy a chance to defend himself. I talked a little bit with his team, very nice people, but they ultimately decided against it. And that's fine. That's okay. There we go. I don't think it looks that good, but whatever. It's whatever. So now I'm taking off my people dress and I'm replacing it with my Don't Die t-shirt. I like to think I'm very subtle. Okay, yeah, sure, whatever. Live so you can keep living. Bryan characterizes not dying as the one and only valid human impulse, the only real takeaway to tease from the entirety of human history. Here's how he explained it to Dr. Mike earlier this year.
I come back to the simple question is, what is the one thing I do know? Is I don't want to die. And so the observation is that Don't Die is the most played game by everyone all over the world every day. You and I breathe every few seconds. We look both ways before we cross the street. We all play Don't Die. So it's played more than capitalism. It's played more than any religion. It's the most played game in the world.
I think we can all agree that being anti-death is broadly helpful. It's good to breathe. It's good to breathe. But it's clear to me that this guy has no concept of too much of a good thing. Bryan, venture capitalist that he is, sees an opportunity to make a line go up. And I really think that's what motivates him. If humans like living, surely we would prefer it if we could live more and more and more. Surely that's how everyone experiences desire. By this framing, proximity to death is a simple failure to optimize, and trying to make peace with mortality is laughable. Bryan wants us to discard the long tradition of reckoning with death through philosophy, religion, and art. Actually, a huge amount of human culture is about this. But to him, it's all a maladaptive coping mechanism from small-minded people who fail to consider that we can just make the line go up.
You know, humans are very clever, and we create clever stories to justify anything we feel uncomfortable with or anything we want to be excited about. And so if you look at the number of things humanity has done to try to reconcile with death, I mean, every religion is an attempt at reconciling with death. Mm-hmm. And we have cultural norms like live fast and die young. And so we have all these tools for us to say that death is not only okay, but it's desirable.
I want to shout out Dr. Mike for asking some great questions in this interview. He basically responds to this argument by asking Bryan if this immortality dream isn't just another way to cope with mortality. And Bryan responds, no, he's built different.
If I try to be as self-aware as possible and strip myself from all things, literally the only thing I can say about my existence is that I want to continue to exist in the next second and the next second.
So first off, this is absolutely not stripped from all things. The notion that wanting to live for 1 second means you must want to live for infinite seconds, unmistakably capitalist. Second, Bryan's process of insulating his ideas from outside influence serves mostly to free them from the burden of having to work. A plan to make humans immortal doesn't hold up to simple questions like, how will we grow enough food? Won't the population go up toward infinity? If old age isn't fatal, won't we all just live until we get terminal cancer? Is that really better? And that's before the inevitable political questions. Who owns these anti-aging therapies? How much do they cost? Who has access to them? Maybe these questions have occurred to you while watching this video. I'm sad to report, Bryan doesn't even try to answer them. He thinks the very idea of immortality is so potent, so forward-thinking, that it's simply above the vulgar concerns of biology, medicine, climate, economics. Sometimes Bryan will be asked one of these practical questions point blank, and he'll respond in a way that makes me feel insane.
Yeah, I think I could definitely respond to this comment and use words that would make sense in the year 2024 of like, yes, like I agree, and like here's all, but I'm really going to comment on this from the 25th century perspective.
Bryan's blanket dismissal of any practical concern is that his field is so cutting edge that humans today are unable to predict or even imagine the path forward.
The evolutionary potential I am suggesting sits beyond our current ability to conceptualize. Just because we can't currently see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We are limited by our imaginations.
At best, he brings up some old technology that had problems and says, we figured those out eventually.
Horses were the primary mode of transport. And there was so much manure all over New York, and everyone thought the world was coming to an end. And then Henry Ford made the Model T.
But that's not a solution. That's the concept of having a solution. Ultimately, Bryan doesn't think these are his problems to deal with. He thinks all the obvious issues with his ideas are soon to disappear in a flash of light with the arrival of artificial superintelligence, which will be able to think millions of times faster than us without any bias toward, experience. He's confident this intelligence could conceivably solve any problem, disease, climate change, to such an extent that humanity can basically put them out of our minds and focus on the real work of, as he puts it, aligning ourselves with AI, which is to say, taming any parts of ourselves that would get in its way. Now, Bryan's right that science is unpredictable. Humans had no way of knowing we would come up with such transformative inventions as vaccines or aviation or the internet. But he is predicting the future. That's the thing. He's only using unpredictability to legitimize baseless speculation. He's saying the future can be anything, therefore anything I have to say is plausible. It's very shaky ground. Everything he says rests on the conceit that artificial superintelligence will resolve all the flaws baked into everything he says, but he has no evidence that it will, or that superintelligence will ever even exist. Bryan is not a computer scientist, he's not a medical researcher, and he has no idea what will or won't be possible with technology that has yet to be designed. His job description, like the value he actually provides to his company, Blueprint, is being the guy who takes a lot of pills every day. And most of the things he does are about making you forget this fact and take him seriously. Bryan tries to convince you he's tapped into some high-tech future, first off, by using way more sophisticated language than he needs to. Anytime he wants to describe regular human stuff, he pulls out the old thesaurus and finds as many STEM words as he can. The supplements he sells aren't supplements, they're the blueprint stack. A stack being like the set of tools a developer uses. If two things have a relationship to each other, that's not a relationship, it's a power law. Best of all, and I really don't know how he gets away with this, his generous use of the word algorithm.
And an algorithm now manages me. I no longer pantry graze. I don't order from a menu. I don't do a spontaneous pizza party. I don't do drinks with friends late night. I don't miss it. I don't want it. They make me feel awful. I think they're bad.
I know he means the drinks made him feel awful, but it's kind of funny to imagine he's talking about the friends.
They make me feel awful. I think they're bad.
Oh, buddy. Anyway, Bryan says he's handed over his life to an algorithm, which sounds like a big deal. In every article about Blueprint, you'll find it mentioned in the second or third sentence. But the nature of this algorithm is never specified. Does he mean some sort of computer program? Does he mean an AI algorithm makes all his choices? No, he means rules. An algorithm is just a sequence of rules. Bryan and his doctors have set a bunch of rules for him, like eat vegan, and wear sunscreen, and he's calling them an algorithm because that makes it sound like a computer decided on them. It didn't. The blueprint protocol is exactly as algorithmic as following a diet, or a workout regimen, or the instructions for installing a fridge, or a recipe for the perfect soft-boiled egg. Actually, calling it a protocol serves the same purpose. A protocol is a set of instructions for a science experiment. Of course, Blueprint is not a science experiment. This is just a branding choice, but it's one he's really committed to. Once you know this is happening, you'll see it everywhere. In a pretty illuminating video, a guy named Andrew Steele, who's an advocate for life extension, but also an actual biologist, criticizes Blueprint for intentionally obscuring what their findings really mean. He talks a lot about the biomarkers Bryan uses to measure his aging. He says they're sketchy and he doesn't really trust them. And then there's this moment.
Step 3, track progress. And I really like this one. Bryan has had hundreds of measurements taken. We've already talked about a few of those. But what this guy says is that some are standard, such as biofluids and fitness scores. Some are advanced, such as MRI and ultrasound. Standard. Biofluids. Now, I'm a biologist. I've written a book on the biology of aging. My wife is a doctor. I've literally never heard the word biofluids before. I guess he's talking about blood tests and urine tests and that sort of thing. But this is just a needless scientification of what are probably fairly standard medical tests.
So the thread he's reading there is written by a fan, not a Blueprint employee. But all the language, images, and sketchy claims come straight from Bryan. Biofluids is a real word, but Bryan is the only person I know of who uses it regularly. And I think that's why he likes it. He's too good for blood. This branding serves to semantically distance Bryan from being human. It means that even when he puts down the lasers and injections and he's doing stuff everyone else does too, he can describe his actions like it's a cyborg performing them. I would argue even Bryan's appearance is part of this mystification effort. He's pale and looks kind of gaunt. He's clearly had work done. His teeth are so white they're almost blue. People say the Blueprint protocol must be failing because Bryan looks a little uncanny valley, but that's exactly what he's going for. He's trying to look less human so people believe his efforts are actually doing something. I mean, really, if the guy just looked 10 years younger than he is, would anyone care? Like seeing someone who looks 36 and finding out they're actually 46? That's like every rich person. This look, on the other hand, is unique. It's provocative. It gets people talking. Even when people get kind of vicious, Bryan is happy to take the jokes. He's very aware of how he comes off to people. It's actually part of the business strategy.
We are going to read mean tweets. Ooh. Yep, thank you. I'm tired of this old-looking man. Yeah, being tired is a source of aging. He looks a bit like handsome Squidward. Who's Squidward? I need to find out.
I was invited to a tremendous dinner, by the way. They call him Bryan Johnson. He looks like a vampire who is 2,000 years old, but still in high school, like in Twilight.
Looking like a vampire who's 2,000 years old and still in high school is more impressive than looking young because it places Bryan outside the aging process altogether. Lacking any real evidence to back up his claims about the future, Bryan's body has become the evidence. When Bryan positions himself as uniquely in touch with the unseen, even as someone who might reveal it to us, he's tapping into a long history of people doing the same. The many inventors, statisticians, and physicists who find themselves thrust into the public eye eventually come to understand that people show a lot of deference to the things we can't see. They remind us of the hard limits of human consciousness, and their very existence implies a higher state we can strive for. That's to say nothing of the popes, prophets, and cult leaders who benefit from this. When something defies explanation, what's the first thing we go to? It must have been God. I've defended this kind of thinking before. Viewers may recall I once thought God put a text file on my desktop. But it's not really rational. Humans have been learning new things about the world for as long as we've existed, and never, as we pull back the curtain, have we found some sacred power hiding.
Nature is always and everywhere of the same sort. It matters little that it extends to infinity. Beyond the extreme limit to which my eyes can reach, it is not different from what it is here. The space which I imagine beyond the horizon is still space, identical with that which I see. The time which flows without end is made up of moments identical with those which I have passed through. If the portions which I touch have of themselves no sacred character, where did the others get theirs? The fact that I do not see them directly is not enough to transform them.
The early sociologist Emile Durkheim argued that this quality of being totally separate from the world we know is precisely what makes a thing sacred. Our respect for the sacred leads us to set it apart from the human, recognizable, profane, and insist that it be protected. It's why cathedrals have this otherworldly silence, and why many religions don't want people drawing their prophets. No man-made depiction can capture the thing. Bryan's work is defined by a really strong sense of the sacred and profane. You can see it when he talks about the past, definite and painful, compared to the future, unknowable and utopian. It's there when he says that human bodies, physical and corrupt, should align themselves with technology, intangible and pure. Most belief systems, while they put the sacred on a pedestal, nonetheless respect that the profane world is the one all of us exist in, and try to give us tools to move through it. I think of Rabbi Nachner in A Serious Man. A congregant comes to him after witnessing what seems like a genuine miracle, the phrase, "help me," inscribed in Hebrew on a man's teeth. And he begs the rabbi to tell him what it means.
The teeth? We don't know. A sign from Hashem? Don't know. Helping others? Couldn't hurt.
Bryan would sooner do away with the profane altogether. This is a person whose life has been painful, whose evening self carries a heavy burden. And I think he finds refuge in his version of the sacred, a high-tech future, not because it's better than the world around him, but because it's vague. Since he can't take in its full shape, it can stand in for anything. It can hold the solution to any challenge he's ever faced, from desire to exhaustion to impulsivity to death itself. His rejection of the profane world is a rejection of the specific, of everything humans can understand and contend with. Anything these eyes can see must be filthy. We revere the unknown, so we seek to understand it. Our understanding desecrates it, and the cycle continues. This is a basic fact of life that everyone copes with in their own way, and for most of us, the trade-off is worth it. We learn interesting things, we put them to use, the profane world gets a little better. But if a person has no respect for the profane, if all they like about the unknown is that they don't know it, I worry something breaks.
A world of profane things may well be unlimited, but it remains a profane world. Do they say that the physical forces with which we come in contact exceed our own? Sacred forces are not to be distinguished from profane ones simply by their greater intensity. They are different. They have special qualities which the others do not have. Quite on the contrary, all the forces manifested in the universe are of the same nature, those that are within us just as those that are outside of us.
In Hirokazu Koreeda's 1998 film Afterlife, the world we move through is purpose-built to support the recently deceased. From the fog, everyone who's died in the past week pours into the lobby of this industrial loft building, where a secretary checks their name off a list and waves them forward. As they sit in a crowded lobby awaiting further instruction, the old make polite conversation about what their lives were like, while the young mostly look around, bewildered at the scale of whatever it is they've just been drafted into. After a woman with a clipboard enters to invite certain names into certain rooms, the nature of this ritual is revealed. A heavenly bureaucracy, running Monday through Friday. Once they arrive, a pair of caseworkers explain to the dead that they will have until Wednesday to choose a single memory from their lives which they'd like to hold on to forever, and that by the following week, all others will be wiped clean. Once they've decided on one, the building's workforce spends Thursday and Friday of the week recreating the location of each memory on a sound stage, and painstakingly producing each one as a film that the dead will carry around with them for the rest of time. In perfect 90s fashion, they will do so on a VHS tape. A lot of the movie's runtime is spent sitting in on these interviews. The caseworkers gently nudge the dead toward meaningful memories, but mostly they just listen to reminiscing. A man in a suit is among the first to decide, barely 10 minutes into the movie. He wants to remember a breeze coming in through the open window as he rode the tram to school. A lot of the memories have this great sensory quality to them. A teenage girl remembers eating fluffy pancakes. A pilot remembers how gentle the clouds looked from his cockpit. One guy spends most of the week going on about how awesome it was having sex with women. We're told this is common. Other than the fog at the front door, this afterlife has a similarly earthly texture to it, nothing like the bright white voids that usually stand in for heaven in movies. A lot about its functioning is never explained to us, because everything we're capable of understanding about it sort of goes without saying. Inside is desks, chairs, bookshelves, radiators, colorful houseplants, chessboards. Outside, cherry trees waiting to blossom, wet ginkgo leaves spread over pavement. My early read of this movie was that it holds daily life in such high regard that it can't think of anything worth leaving it behind for. The world you and I inhabit is already so rich that we're terrified of death. The afterlife can find nothing to improve on, save for maybe the time limit. Really, what could be better than the chance to finish every book ever written? What heaven could be higher than watching the flowers bloom every spring? It's a nice thought, but I wasn't quite right. Because this building, it's gradually revealed, isn't in the afterlife. On Saturday morning, the dead shuffle into the building's theater to watch their film's premiere. As soon as one ends, its star vanishes from the audience and moves on to whatever it is that's really next. It turns out this building is just a waypoint in the fog, a quick stopover in between lives. The only people who live here permanently are the ones who failed to choose a memory. Anyone who isn't ready to let go yet and accept their life is over gets a job here as a caseworker or manager or film crew. In their downtime, they sit around in a big, drafty building, mastering chess and reading encyclopedias cover to cover, slotting themselves into a truly mediocre bureaucracy, not because there's nothing greater, but because they're too afraid to submit to it. In the end, afterlife doesn't show us even a glimpse of humans' final resting place. Wherever people go after this isn't described or given a name, lest we make assumptions about how it works. Even the moment people disappear from the theater is never actually shown on screen. The film's refusal to speculate is a bold expression of humility in the face of death. If there is something greater than us, then trying to explain it in human terms would be pointless. It must be really, truly beyond our understanding. Nothing about a company can be sacred. Even the absolute best case scenario, success beyond measure, ends with creating goods and services. In that riveting early stage of a hype cycle, CEOs will promise utopias, philosophical changes, things that aren't and can't be products, only to reveal, once the dust has settled, a generally unchanged reality. They told us AI was different because the current one always is, but several years into the hype cycle, I think it's fair to question how much has actually changed. In a recent article for The Walrus, Navneet Alang wrote,
Yet, for all the high-minded talk of what AI might one day do, much of what artificial intelligence appeared to do best was entirely quotidian, taking financial statements and reconciling figures, making security practices more responsive and efficient, transcribing and summarizing meetings, triaging emails more efficiently. What that emphasis on day-to-day tasks suggested is that AI isn't so much going to produce a grand new world as, depending on your perspective, make what exists now slightly more efficient, or, rather, intensify and solidify the structure of the present. Yes, some parts of your job might be easier, but what seems likely is that those automated tasks will in turn simply be part of more work.
Time after time, the revolution we were told to expect is revealed as impossible or impossible to sell. Money is usually made by building better versions of things that already existed, or often just cheaper ones, things that require fewer staff, less skill, and that offer more leverage for bosses. When Bryan Johnson tells us that artificial superintelligence will usher in a new era of human longevity, or that it'll solve climate change, or it'll help us level up our consciousness, I don't think what he's describing will ever exist. But if it does, it'll probably be used to deny people mortgages. Ultimately, neither of us actually have access to this future, so anything I say about it is just guesswork. Maybe it's time to set aside the transcendence Bryan is promising and contend with what he's actually done. After getting a pretty generous payday when PayPal bought the company he founded, Bryan's first big move was to raise $100 million to start the OS Fund. To reiterate, this was a venture capital firm that invested mostly in biotechnology, but really in anything that was ambitious and long-term. It's hard to gauge how venture capital funds perform, especially ones that don't exist anymore, so I can't be certain whether they made or lost money for investors. On one hand, they claim to be in the top 10% of VC funds. On the other, after that initial $100 million, they failed to raise a second round of investment and quietly faded out of existence around 2021. It seems to me like the OS Fund was successful in pure dollar terms, and obviously that was their goal. But as we know, companies can reach feverish valuations without ever producing a viable product. So what I'm more interested in is the impact of the fund, what the companies actually managed to do with the money. In the interest of fairness, let's start off with a few success stories. Canota Health was developing an allergy test that doesn't rely on triggering allergic reactions. Sensible. And it seems like they've done it. This product was just cleared by the FDA. Just was developing a vegan egg substitute, and you can buy it at the store now. I hear it's pretty good. Lucira Health was working on simple kits to test for diseases. They actually went on to create the first ever at-home COVID tests in late 2020, and then they went bankrupt. And then a lot of the companies are sort of middle of the pack. They had much more ambitious goals, like cancer immunotherapies or DNA computers. These ones generally don't have much to show yet, and I may have my doubts about some, like Truthian, a company that sounds like they're just Theranos, but again, but, you know, I could be wrong. Maybe they're making it work. Science takes a long time. The failures, though. Oh, the failures. Ginkgo Bioworks was an incredibly hyped up company that aimed to manufacture things using custom-designed bacteria and yeasts. When they went public in 2021, they were valued at $17 billion, despite finding basically no use case for their technology. And 3 years later, they still kind of haven't. They are a solution in search of a problem. The company's stock has plummeted 95%, their revenue has gone down every year, and the quarterly earnings reports don't even try to conceal a general sentiment of Planetary Resources started out with the modest plan of mining in space. They wanted to send probes to check what resources could be found on asteroids, and then send robots to mine them and ship them back to Earth. Their ultimate goal was to build human settlements on these asteroids, which sounds crazy, but if you just visit their website to learn more, you'll find that actually... Oh. Yeah, that makes sense. After this, Bryan put down $100 million of his very own dollars to start Kernel, a company trying to put chips in people's brains, and then almost immediately realized it wasn't going to work. What they intended to do with the chips seems like it was changing every week, described by one witness as kind of smoke and mirrors. And even the simplest implementations were decades of research away. An MIT Technology Review article titled "The Entrepreneur with the $100 Million Plan to Link Brains to Computers" details how the entrepreneur did not, in fact, have a plan.
Last August, he announced he'd create Kernel and build the first neural prosthetic for human intelligence enhancement. But Johnson's business plan was extremely vague. One scientist called it metaphysical. 6 months after launching Kernel amid a media blitz, Johnson says he's dropped his initial plans for a memory implant, switched scientific advisors, hired a new team, and decided to instead invest in developing a more general-purpose technology for recording and stimulating the brain using electrodes.
Kernel scrapped the project, parted ways with its chief scientist, and then, left with nothing to do, decided to just acquire a different company and start from scratch. Since then, the company has pivoted entirely to making a brain imaging headset called the Kernel Flow. Their hope is to use an emerging technology called, bear with me, functional near-infrared spectroscopy, whatever, to look at biomarkers that can predict whether a specific treatment can be effective for an illness in the brain, like antidepressants, for example. This is cool enough. It's nothing revolutionary, but it's reasonable science. But now they have to study whether FNIRS can do this, whether this idea of predicting treatment outcomes with biomarkers is possible. As an outside observer, it doesn't seem like it's going great. They had sold less than 10 units as of 2022. It doesn't seem like they filed any new patents in years. And Bryan basically doesn't mention it anymore, which is saying something because that guy never stops talking. I repeat to myself, science takes a long time. This could totally work. But even if it does, the money was for brain chips. The money was to level up our consciousness with software updates every month. Knowing whether an antidepressant will work before you try it, it's not that. Okay, now for the pièce de résistance. The reason any of us have heard of this guy. Blueprint. Bryan's project to level up human consciousness, reverse biological aging, and align humanity with AI. Or as it's often described in the media, $2 million a year to live forever. $2 million isn't that much money. It's a lot to you or I, sure, but medical research is an incredibly expensive field. Colonel raised 80 times that number, and even then cannot afford to work on brain chips. Blueprint's ambitions seem at first glance even loftier, not just working in the brain, but experimenting with hundreds of procedures and tracking their impacts on the liver, the kidneys, the skin, the colon, the heart, and so on. How do you do that for $2 million a year? Well, if you're being sensible, you could pay the salaries of like a few researchers. You might be able to cover the first phase of a single clinical trial. But the actual answer is that you don't, and they're not. Blueprint is not doing science. All their tests are run on a single guy who's also undergoing hundreds of other health interventions, constantly replacing old ones with new ones, making him perhaps the single human being worst suited to be a test subject. Even if some experimental therapy cut through all that noise and delivered incredible results, they would have no way to transition their finding into a clinical trial. I expect some people to be typing comments saying that I'm being unfair because, that 2 million figure only represents Bryan's personal medical expenses. But those medical expenses are the company. There's no secret research wing that's actually doing science. Bryan is their one thing. His healthcare regimen is the business plan. It's the reason Johnson gets all this media coverage that first calls him eccentric and then suggests he might be onto something. He's not onto something, please. Once you cut through the jargon and speculation and PR stunts building this whole thing up as something that matters, it becomes clear that Blueprint is a lifestyle brand. It is a company that makes YouTube videos as a way to get people to click affiliate links, or download the wellness app they're working on, or buy tickets to in-person Don't Die events, or join their Discord server, and above all, order their line of supplements, the Blueprint Stack. For all I could say about Bryan's professional judgment, there is no doubt that he is both very passionate about life extension and very rich. He could comfortably fund his own biotech lab. He could build a good team, put out a few papers a year, and maybe be a small part of increasing global life expectancy. It wouldn't be unheard of. Sam Altman is currently doing this exact thing with a company called Retro. So it's interesting that Bryan has actively chosen not to. I suspect the reason for this is none of this is making any money. This isn't Bryan's first rodeo. Well, I think he really believes that superintelligence is coming to save him. He knows there's a real possibility it won't, and I think Blueprint is his way to account for that. Using a hype cycle to sell tangible goods is kind of brilliant. It means he makes money off of ideas like life extension and superintelligence, even if they never become real. What do you do in a gold rush? You sell shovels. It's not that Blueprint is useless or only has value through hype. I'm sure Bryan is in great shape. I wouldn't be surprised if he lives to 90. But if he does, it won't have much of anything to do with the experimental drugs or monitoring of biomarkers. As I learned from Andrew Steele, we don't really know of many good markers for aging. The field is just too new. So what Bryan's done with these stats that he parades everywhere is fudge them. He's found a few metrics that usually go up as a person's health deteriorates, and he's trying to reduce them even if they, in themselves, are perfectly fine. A lot of these go way over my head, but I'll give a fancy example and a simple one. In his skincare routine, Bryan was applying this gel to reduce skin autofluorescence. That is a real thing that is higher in diabetics and smokers, but from my understanding, it's a benign symptom. Like, at most, a way your body tells you something is wrong. There's no reason to believe making the number go down would do anything. And now a much simpler example. Gray hair. A lot of people die with gray hair. If they had simply colored it brown, would they have lived another 10, 20 years? Who could say? The detailed metrics he uses are, again, about making it look like something is happening. And because he uses them to guide whether new treatments are effective, their findings are basically worthless. Once you strip away the branding and get to the actual reasons Bryan is healthy, what's left of the Blueprint protocol is entirely worldly. Sleep, hydration, vegetables, and exercise. Of course Blueprint is good for you. That doesn't mean it's not a scam. This reminds me of a trend that kind of pisses me off. A lot of YouTube creators have taken it upon themselves to spend a month living the Blueprint lifestyle, following everything he does to the letter except maybe the prescriptions. And by the end, they're amazed. They've lost a ton of weight. They have more energy than ever. And they report this back as if they've, discovered something. Like we didn't know that eating healthy foods can make a person healthy. There's just nothing there. Bryan kind of tells on himself in his typical sciencey sounding way when he invokes the 80-20 principle in marketing the Blueprint stack. The 80-20 principle is the idea that in a lot of situations, 80% of results come from only the top 20% of inputs or efforts. In a blog article from a couple years ago, Bryan describes it like this.
Power laws are manifest everywhere. For example, 80% of language uses 20% of its words. 80% of sales come from 20% of customers. 80% of internet traffic goes to 20% of websites. They are disproportionately useful if you can harness their energy.
80-20 is a classic business platitude, useful for wooing the kind of person who's impressed when they hear you say two numbers. When Bryan is promoting the Blueprint stack, he frequently says it's a way to get 80% of the benefit of his full protocol for only 20% of the effort. Let's think for a second about what that means. At the time of recording, the Blueprint stack is a 400-calorie diet plan that involves taking a few supplements, making a drink from a powdered mix, downing a shot of olive oil, and sprinkling some trail mix over half a cup of nutty pudding.
I want to eat this for sure.
All combined, this intervention costs under $20 a day, is the size of a small breakfast, and Bryan regularly claims that it works 4 times as well as everything else he does combined. Look, I think the guy's a grifter, and even I have to question whether that ratio is possible. Weighing this against the impact of the intensive workout regimen, the unforgiving sleep schedule, the dozens of pills a day, the carousel of tests and imaging for organ function, the doctors who tweak his plan to perfectly optimize its efficiency. I've watched Bryan zap every inch of his body with lasers. I have watched him scream in agony as he gets 300 million stem cells injected into his joints for $40,000. I've watched him try to disable the part of his brain that has thoughts so he can avoid even thinking about eating a cookie. And now he's saying that all that stuff, all of it combined, has about the same impact as a single sip of olive oil. Let's just hone it down. As of right now, the actual material at the center of all this frenzy, the real world footprint of Bryan's paradise on Earth, is as follows. A YouTube channel, 3 audiobooks, a multivitamin, a drink powder, 3 dietary supplements, a protein powder, a trail mix, a bottle of olive oil, and a t-shirt.
Here's one for you. It's the fault of Adam and Eve. The story is they're in the Garden of Eden. Eve is persuaded by the serpent to eat the forbidden fruit. She gives it to Adam. They get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. What if that story was made up? What if the story really was that Adam and Eve Due to their gluttonous behavior, they ruined their environment. They had to leave the Garden of Eden and go to a arid and uncomfortable and difficult world.
Bryan Johnson was born in 1977 in Provo, Utah, a town of about 70,000 at the time, home to Brigham Young University and a regional hub for tech startups, but perhaps best known as the single most Mormon city in the world. I'm afraid I've buried the lead on this one. Bryan was raised in the suburbs in a religious family. His mom stayed at home to take care of her 5 kids, and his stepdad owned a trucking company. His birth father had left the church when Bryan was young and struggled for many years with addiction. They didn't see much of each other. At the age of 19, Bryan left for a mission trip to Ecuador that would influence his worldview for years to come. In interviews, he says the depths of poverty he witnessed there helped spark this lifelong desire to help people and reinforce his faith in the admittedly more prosperous American project. The fact that he still views missionaries as these selfless volunteers, well, that's telling. Upon returning home at 21, Bryan attended Brigham Young, a Mormon school named after an early church leader. He started a string of businesses, he got married, had 3 kids, all very expected things for a young Mormon guy. Before writing this video, I didn't know much about the Mormon Church, whose full name I should say is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I still really don't know all that much, but one thing that stood out in my research is that more than possibly any other belief system, Mormons consider the barrier between profane and sacred to be permeable. Adherents are said to have a direct line to Jesus. Church leaders are recognized as prophets. And the Latter-day Saints who give the religion its name are not canonical figures who preside over a certain domain. Instead, they're the worshipers. Most uniquely, Mormons believe the God they worship began as a flesh and blood human being, just a guy, who, by following a holy path, managed to perfect himself and achieve eternal life. The theology outlines a process for any human living today to perfect ourselves too, except the queer ones, and the Black ones until the 70s. By being a good citizen, by improving one's mental and physical condition, and by spreading the church's teachings far and wide, the Latter-day Saint begins a process which, after they die, will see them rewarded with everything. A perfect Mormon becomes a God all their own, with the power to create universes to preside over, and entire new human races to be worshipped by. And even this will only be the beginning, because as a God, they will continue to perfect themselves eternally beyond the reaches of time and space. And this, above all, is the reward for a life well lived. They'll still never get there. As the prophet Brigham Young wrote, "All organized existence is in progress either to an endless advancement in eternal perfections or back to dissolution. Nothing less than the privilege of increasing eternally, in every sense of the word, can satisfy the immortal spirit. If the endless stream of knowledge from the eternal fountain could all be drunk in by organized intelligences, so sure immortality would come to an end, and all eternity be thrown upon the retrograde path." Bryan left the church in his 30s, right before Braintree was bought by PayPal, so everything he's known for these days happened after he renounced these beliefs. But I am not the first person to note that the Blueprint Project feels deeply Mormon. I don't mean this as a dig either. I think it's normal for the religion you grew up in to stick with you. I was raised in one of the most relaxed churches in the country and left as a teenager, and still, when something bad happens to me, my first impulse is to believe God is trying to punish me for something. I can't imagine how large that shadow must loom if you walked away well into your career after a marriage and children, and after the worldview you grew up in made you unspeakably wealthy. Again, I don't have any direct experience with the Mormon Church, so I could be off the mark here, but I have some thoughts as to how Bryan's Mormon upbringing might have shaped the person we know today. First, his endless war on laziness feels to me very churchy, and especially steeped in the church's gender roles. Men in the LDS Church are expected to be the sole breadwinners in their households, which can cause all kinds of stress for all parties. After she interviewed dozens of Mormon men about their experiences, Carrie Stoddard Salisbury wrote for the Mormon feminist blog Exponent 2, "Many men reported intense pressure to provide for the family on their income alone. They felt pushed into pursuing more lucrative careers out of duty and discouraged from following their own personal interests. In contrast to financial partnership marriages with two incomes, men who are sole providers face extra pressure if they are ever fired, unemployed, or if they become injured or disabled and unable to work. Many men reported feeling shame at hearing comments like, "Did your wife have to go back to work?" And "He just doesn't make enough for his wife to stay home." Second, we're all afraid to die, but I wonder if Bryan leaving the faith could account for both the degree that he avoids death, now that there's nothing waiting for him, and his disdain for any way of making sense of it. Third, an idea animating everything he's done over the past decade, that humans need to level up our consciousness and prepare for a new era of prosperity brought about by, you guessed it, people like him. It's not surprising for a former missionary. A common interpretation is that Blueprint is Bryan's effort to do what any good Mormon would, to perfect himself, live eternally, and become something like a god. That's a valid read, there's plenty to support it, but I think something important is missing. To me, the one thing to understand, the real core of this story, is that Bryan sees something in himself that's fundamentally meek. I don't know where it came from, I would bet the church, but something ingrained in him a sense of being lesser than. And then what? Hardly matters. A deep distress for his own desires means he must find some moral authority that'll hand him a set of rules to live by, and then he must follow those rules perfectly. Bryan doesn't trust what he would do if his life weren't tightly regimented. I think that's what led him to Silicon Valley, and I think it's what led him to start Blueprint, two lifestyles that insist on compulsive self-denial. Sure, his concept of moral purity has evolved over the years, from Christian and defined by faith to technocratic and defined by optimization. But the new concept doesn't include him either. This unruly desire for food and sex and other pleasures, this pesky will to live, will always tug at its leash, will always need to be chained back and starved. He doesn't like himself. And so, even in his most ludicrous fantasy, where cascading longevity breakthroughs enable an indefinite human lifespan and create a veritable heaven on earth, Bryan considers himself, at best, the second in command. The God is this artificial superintelligence he's always talking about. A program defined by infinite power, one which will arrive and instantly redeem all his shortcomings, make good on all his empty promises. A presence that bends space and time around it like putty, unseen but all-seeing, untouched but all-touching. A power that no language can account for. It's not 1,000 times better than us, if only because in the time spent making such a claim, it's grown 1,000 times greater still. A God defined not by being, but by growing and outgrowing itself. A shepherd scale ushering humanity into a heaven we will never arrive at, because the mere act of arriving would imply an upper bound. Bryan measures holiness by distance from humanity. With a spine that's slowly compressing and a body that wants to be dirt, he sees himself so far from godliness that anything capable of being a god must be totally unrecognizable to him. He can't describe what this being will look like when they one day meet, yet strives to mold himself in its image anyway, offering up every facet of his body as machine-readable data for it to optimize. Born at the crossroads of Mormonism, entrepreneurship, and technology, where infinite growth meets infinite growth meets infinite growth, the pride of Provo had one look around and built the only thing that made sense to: capitalism as religion. It was always clear to me that Bryan's relationship to science is not that of a scientist. He wants something out of it, a reassurance, a moral center. It just isn't built to provide. But if you're really set on finding one here, you can do worse than the black box of AI. We know what gets put in, and we know what decisions get spat out, but what happens in the middle works by a logic we can't relate to and can't actually access to scrutinize. And we like this. It's humbling. No matter how many times we're warned against doing so, People tend to trust algorithmically reached decisions as if they're not decisions at all, rather simple reflections of an aspect of reality too true for humans to grasp. If an intelligence today can find hidden insights in one context, say drug discovery, a superintelligence would generalize that ultraviolet logic to shine over everything. So long as we offer it our unwavering obedience, it would tell us how to reverse climate change, how to restructure the global economic system for perfect efficiency, how to put a halt to aging once and for all. It would be perfect. It would make us immortal, and then it would keep going. The fact that this technology doesn't exist right now, honestly, isn't a serious concern. Bryan's faith is steadfast. He knows where lines go. And if technology really can do anything, its ultimate task is obvious, isn't it? It will build the God he needs for this world to make sense.
Sometimes the pink opaque feels more real than real life.
It's hard to prove a negative, but that's kind of what this conversation requires. No matter how unlikely a promise seems, unless it breaks some hard rule of the universe, you're going to have a hard time ruling it out. I will say that after looking at a lot of circumstantial evidence, I'm pretty sure life extension won't be the stock market's next big thing, and that artificial intelligence won't exist in the way Bryan describes it. I'm very confident that immortality will never happen, and genuinely totally certain that if it does, Bryan will have nothing to do with it. These ideas that he's bet everything on, just as much spiritually as financially, are just ideas. You know what that means? Oh, this is sad. As I've said, I don't think this really matters for Bryan's bottom line. He's making his money on pudding now anyway. But it is interesting to consider how their failure to launch might work out for him personally. On one hand, Jesus hasn't come back and Christianity's been doing fine. A belief system can be sustained, maybe forever, on the promise of a grand arrival right around the corner. Maybe it doesn't matter if it never happens, because the tension of that promise, the drama of waiting around and looking for signs, is itself really compelling. Ray Kurzweil, a futurist who's almost like the proto-Bryan Johnson, has been making outlandish predictions about tech since the 80s, and their repeated failure to come true has never once slowed him down. In 2005, he published a book whose title confidently announced, "The singularity is near," which he followed up almost 20 years later with a sequel, "The singularity is nearer." But isn't there something kind of tragic about this fate? Knowing Bryan has dedicated his life to this God that will never exist and would be unable to accept him even if it did. Knowing he's created a worldview that's hermetically sealed and might prove impossible to escape from, because any hope, no matter how remote, can be justified with a wink and a little, "you never know." Since 2013, maybe even longer, Bryan has been trying to disappear into fantasy. For people in his line of work, disruptive tech CEOs, this is basically the job description. Tech startups have this hardline idealism about them, privileging distant possibilities over the actual conditions on the ground. A spokesperson's faith in this unlikely future they're pitching must be so total that it makes that future possible. Thousands of staff put their heads down and spend years doing research, writing code, attending meetings, submitting their actual lives to what starts as, and often never amounts to anything more than, a few interesting sentences. Bryan understands his role in this equation and commits to it entirely, paying so much attention to the fantasy of immortality that most people don't realize no labor is actually taking place. Look what he's done to the part of himself that does work. He rejects its appetite, he sleeps alone, he barely gets any sun, all to make it a vessel for profitable ideas. He thinks living for ideas means he's transcended humanity, but has he even found anything new? Can't we see a little bit of Bryan in every police armory and every library closed on Sundays? Can't we see it on college campuses when admin choose weapons manufacturers over their own students? Isn't it responsible for quietly disappearing millions in this endless stretch of post-pandemic? This is a man who first left Utah so he could study under Gary Becker, the Chicago school economist who reduced humans to vessels for money when he argued that every aspect of human behavior, love, crime, friendship, everything, must be understood through the framework of free market economics. Supply and demand, market value. Blueprint is not the ugliest way this belief shows itself, not even in Bryan's own life. In 2019, Taryn Southern had just made a documentary about Bryan's work at Kernel. At the time, Southern was both an employee of Kernel and engaged to Bryan, so already some ethical questions.
I never imagined that a relationship could produce this much happiness and value, Johnson wrote in an email to friends and business associates in May 2018.
Not long after the film premiered at Tribeca, Southern got some bad news. She had breast cancer, stage 3. Southern started chemo, and in this difficult time of her life, Johnson showed up for his fiancée by dumping her, kicking her out of his house, and firing her from Kernel. According to an expose in Vanity Fair,
calling her a bad deal and a net negative, Johnson told Southern she had to move out of the house as soon as possible because, according to the lawsuit, it would be too inconvenient for him to move. In a text message to her friends around the time of the breakup, Southern said that Johnson had told her that she had used cancer as a weapon to make everything about her.
Because the breakup completely upended her life, she tried to sue Johnson, though not for $9 million, as he claims, only to find that as his employee, she had previously signed an agreement to settle any disputes through forced arbitration, a process the Vanity Fair piece describes as notoriously favorable to employers. She lost. Bryan demanded $500,000 in legal fees. He won. I've spent 3 months trying to understand this guy, and this still doesn't make sense. Why even be alive? Why even be alive? They decide what the rules are. They write the contracts, or their lawyers do. They structure the world, right? And then they put themselves like as far away from it as they possibly can. Why? Until I was about 2 years old, I lived in an apartment building that had a pretty serious case of black mold. I'm pretty sure that's what gave me the asthma I still deal with, and it might have been what landed me in the hospital with pneumonia when I was 3. I don't remember this time in my life, but I can still feel it every time I breathe in. The air just doesn't want to cooperate. I usually try not to think about it, but sometimes that's impossible. At 17, I was on a waitlist to get therapy for PTSD. It's technically covered by the government, but actually accessing it is a whole other story. When the health department learned that I was trans, they decided instead to drop me into a gender dysphoria support group, presumably to free up my spot on the list. The group met in a hospital at the top of a mountain. Locals call it a mountain, more of a really big hill. And I didn't have a car, and the bus somehow never showed up when I needed it. So half the time, I would end up having to run to the hospital, 15 or so minutes up this pretty steep hill. I'd show up late and winded, and I'd struggle to breathe through the whole session. And then the actual session was useless to me.
Go. Go.
At 23, last June, an especially dry Canadian spring led to the worst wildfire season in recorded history. By the year's end, 150,000 square kilometers of land had burned in no fewer than 6,000 fires. Here's what it looked like from space. From the ground, the sky was a thick orange, and the sun was there but wrong, just hovering between smoke. A few days in, the news broke that my hometown of Montreal had the worst air quality of any city in the world. It's always got to be someone's turn. But even as I kept the windows shut and ran the air purifier at full blast, just getting out of bed to wash a few dishes destroyed me for days. It felt like someone had wrung the moisture out of my body like a kitchen sponge. That week, I journaled obsessively about the same thought over and over. That no matter how long I live, I know how I'm going to die. The horror of eternal life is not that Bryan has carved out his insides and replaced them with nothing. While this is true, he's made his decision, and I'm sure he's happy with it. The horror is ours to feel. Slouched over, trying to breathe in overcrowded hospital waiting rooms, knowing that every additional year he lives is a year he's stolen from us. Whenever I'm reminded what the world has done to my body, black mold, virus, forest fire, sprinting, I feel like I'm being nudged out of reality by some much larger force. It's exhausting, and sometimes my impulse is to just give up. Not die, but divest myself from the world, stay perfectly still and hope it doesn't notice me. In this particular line of work, it's tempting to disappear into imagery and live mostly as an idea in other people's heads. It's important to understand that this impulse is not toward detachment, that ultimate sign of enlightenment. It's probably best described as an anxious avoidance. Actually, a desire for life so extreme, so overcome by a fear of loss, that it locks itself away. On my worst days, I remind myself of the office workers in Correda's afterlife. Their refusal of the natural process, exactly the thing keeping them from anything greater. At my best, I like to think I belong in another one of his movies, 2009's Air Doll. The protagonist, a young woman named Nozomi, is, physically speaking, a blow-up sex doll who has inexplicably gained sentience. Her owner, a lonely waiter named Hideo, dresses her up, cooks her meals, wheels her around town, and does the obvious. This quirky premise is quickly clarified as horrifying when the film stops portraying Nozomi using a plastic doll and swaps her out for the living, breathing Deana, who must at several points hold her breath and pretend she's not alive. Nozomi's life to this point has been an uninterrupted string of violations and objectifications. Her position as both a woman and an object, giving men license to do whatever they please. She understands this intuitively from the moment she becomes conscious. And how does she respond? She tries on some outfits. She takes a boat ride. She goes to the video store. Anytime Nozomi is not pretending to be a blow-up doll, she is out experiencing the world with complete openness, looking around, taking notes, and integrating everything she learns back into herself. She plays with some kids in a sandbox. She sees how people walk and tries to copy them. These are the moments where I fell in love with the movie. In the film's biggest watch and learn moment, when someone tells Nozomi that living things eventually die, she decides to throw out her pump so she can join in. Being a piece of plastic, Nozomi could walk the earth for millions of years before she ever decays. But she spent time outside of humanity before, so she knows there's nothing to do all day. It's the material world or nothing. For those of us who've been left out of society, exploited or objectified, escaping that position and getting to be a person in the world is transcending. And look, I've talked about this idea with Correda because he's my favorite director right now, but you don't just find it in mature philosophical movies. In The Little Mermaid, Ariel has everything a person is told to want, gadgets and gizmos, etc., and she's willing to give it all up for a chance to be a person. In Ratatouille, Remy is constantly risking his life just to deepen his appreciation for food, to experience cheese, then strawberry, then both, creating this sublime experience that can't be explained or quantified. Would you believe me if I told you this video was originally about photorealism in art? I'm so serious. The one guy was going to get like a paragraph or two and then he just swallowed the thing. I've noticed that photorealist paintings and drawings are often met with disdain from the art crowd because they don't have much of an angle on reality. They present things plainly, as they look or as a picture of them would. And I'm like somewhat in the same boat. Those vivid charcoal drawings of eyes really do get old. But aren't they also kind of amazing? Like, to pay such close attention to the world that you can recreate it out of itself, and then get a bunch of people huddle around to admire some totally regular thing. I've been following an illustrator named Martin Warren for a while, who does these illustrations of insects that boggle. Hey. Oh, yeah, it's going pretty good. It's been long, but I'm pretty much done. Yeah, how about you? That's good. Yeah, I'm glad. We somehow still haven't reached the bottom of the iceberg. It seems like everywhere I looked, I happened across like a new company Bryan had a weird history with. Awaken Capital, BRJ Ventures, who cares? The really interesting discovery that I want to share is that Bryan has published not 3 books, as he advertises, but 5. And the other 2 are children's books. It turns out that after Bryan left the Mormon Church, but before he started Blueprint, he spent a couple years as a children's book author. I've read them both. This one is called The Proto Project. It features an AI sidekick. This one is called Code 7, Cracking the Code for an Epic Life. And the code is basically don't be on welfare. You can see a lot of like the same DNA shared between this stuff and Bryan's more recent work. But the way he like repackages his message for a young audience is fascinating. I have never met someone who thinks kids work this way. I have so much to say. So I went and filmed a whole other video where I review and talk about these 2 books. And you'll find that video exclusively on Nebula, the streaming service I and a bunch of other creators own together. Nebula is, in my humble opinion, a really nice place to watch things. It's got a clean interface, no ads, no autoplay. It's kind of nice to use a platform that isn't actively trying to get you addicted to it. But the main reason I love Nebula is that it feels like a great place to try new, weird, ambitious stuff. I mean, let's be real. How many insanely homoerotic vampire movies are on YouTube, right? You don't have to look it up. I'll tell you, it's 0. Nebula has 1. It's called Dracula's Ex-Girlfriend. It's really good. We're really trying to push the envelope these days. And Nebula means we can develop our creative voices and make things that wouldn't be possible anywhere else. If you sign up for Nebula, you help us do all that. And in return, you get all of our videos ad-free, often several days before they come out on YouTube. You get fun bonus features like this book review and a kind of enormous slate of original shows, documentaries, and movies. If you use my link, you can get a yearly subscription for 40% off, which comes out to $36 a year, $3 a month. We also have monthly plans, lifetime plans, and now gift cards. Perfect for the person in your life who's gay or really into trains. Discount with my link, go.nebula.tv/LilyAlexander. Do it.